Not sure what they're gonna get, but
Yeah.
I know they're getting, I know it's in the budget for 18, so.
How nice.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
In the new year.
Look at Kansas City as a pie. Okay, there's all these pieces of pie they're developing. It's a piece of pie. Majority of it is
That's the first. It's been a long time since all of us have been.
I know.
Yeah.
So why not get ahead of it and make it pie?
I'll go with that.
That's my perspective.
What's the show, the Magnificent Seven? Oh, yeah.
Get the theme song going.
We said I'll leave and get back down to the six. Marlboro Man.
Oh, that,
Marlboro
yeah.
Man.
Yeah, from the Magnificent Seven. So
The
it was,
Magnificent Seven,
Oh.
yeah, it was from the commercials.
I read a case study about him where his family, after he died, they blamed his farmer over his cancer. He was a celebrity that had $1 gazillion and everything else, but they gave him cancer because they didn't tell him smoking is bad for his health.
Well, back in the day, they didn't think it was.
Everyone
until-
can make that claim from,
I
you know,
know.
50 years ago, or,
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, causes cancer.
well, live and learn.
So,
grounds us and keeps us and helps our
It's like the
Probably.
Diet Cokes could be bad for
Whatever.
you because of the process.
But you know,
calories.
you can't clean that
Diet
grease,
Cokes,
so.
Coke's bad for you.
I don't
yeah, I don't drink coffee, but you know, I drink some coffee once in a while.
we probably shouldn't.
I don't know if that's really that great for you.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock.
You and I feel the same way.
Go ahead and call to order this regular session of the City of Leavenworth Planning Commission. We do have a quorum. Commissioners have received minutes from the September 11th meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to be made to the minutes? Okay, if not, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. We have no old business. New business, we have a public hearing. It's 2017-22 text on a text amendment. You have the staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, these are the 2017 updates, text amendments to the adopted development regulations. All of these changes are intended to be basic housekeeping items. Over the past year or so of using the regulations, these are just small items that have come up just through the course of staff and applicants using it, things that could be cleaned up or made a little bit more clear. And so that's what these changes are intended to be. None of these changes are intended to be any substantial changes to our process or the way we review things. Again, these are just kind of little housekeeping items. The Planning Commission did review most of these at your last Planning Commission meeting in September. Staff did add a few more changes based on conversation and other things that we'd come up with through our review of some past notes. So we've got about 16 changes. I'll just go through those. If you have any questions or changes or comments, additions, let me know. The first one is in section 2.01 in regard to the text amendment process, subsection B. Since the section states that amendments have to be initiated by city staff, city commission, or planning commission, there's really no need to use a form to submit the suggestions on. It's not an application, so just taking out that language stating that the amendments have to be proposed on forms established by the director. The next change is in the same section, section 2.02 plating, subsections B3 and 4. And this is in regards to the review process for administrative plats and minor subdivisions. They're intended to be two separate application types. Administrative plats are intended to involve lot line adjustments, lot splits, or lot combinations of previously platted land and would involve no new right-of-way or easements. Minor subdivisions would be smaller plats. They might be previously unplatted land. Those would be plats involving up to 5 total lots. And so the process really was intended to reflect that administrative plats be reviewed administratively by staff and not need to come to the Planning Commission prior to being recorded with the county. And minor subdivisions do need to come to the Planning Commission for final approval. Again, minor subdivisions don't include any new right-of-way or easements, so the Planning Commission does have final approval on those. Those do not go on to the City Commission the same way major plats do, and those would be plats involving right-of-way and easements. The next section being changed is section 2.04 in regards to special use permits. We previously did not have language in that section indicating how to handle a protest petition period. State statute does provide that special use permits have a protest petition period the same way that rezonings do. And that would be after the Planning Commission holds a public hearing for a special use permit. The public has 14 days in which they can submit a protest petition prior to that application going to the City Commission for final approval. So we just added that same language that we have for rezonings into the section regarding the special use permits so that we're accounting for that process. And we have been following that process, but just needed to get the language in there for that.
Now, Julie, is that, the 14 days, is that based on a calendar days?
Yeah, 14 calendar days, not working days. Okay, the next section is everybody's favorite, the section 4.04 use standards, just the definition of yardicles, just changing that definition to miscellaneous yard decor, since that is what it's intended to cover. Things like statuary arbors, trellises, and other small decorative items that are allowed in a residential yard. I'm losing my pages. Oh, here we go. Okay, the next section is again in section 4.04 in the use standards, subsection B.4. This is in regards to the language regarding commercial vehicles. And you'll see in later I did add a definition for commercial vehicles, so this is kind of tied into that. We didn't have a definition of commercial vehicles before as something that's, we said that they're prohibited, but did not have a definition of what a commercial vehicle is. So in researching the best way to define that, what I did was bring in the definition from the Kansas Department of Revenue and how they define commercial vehicles in the terms of their licensing of vehicles. That seemed like it would be a good consistent way for us to refer to commercial vehicles the same way the state does. So if something is licensed as a commercial vehicle, that's how we're considering it as well. So as part of the state's definition, they do define vehicles exceeding 10,000 gross vehicle weight. So I changed, previously we had 12,000 gross vehicle weight, so I changed that to 10,000 to be in line with the state's definition of commercial vehicles. And then again, we'll get to it. I did add in the actual definition of commercial vehicle to our definition section. Next section for change is here in the same section, 4.04 use standards, subsection B5. And this is in regards to specific language regarding home occupations in home child care centers. This is language that had been in our previous development regulations that we just updated here about a year and a half ago. This language was just left out. It is something that we've found need for in the past here, working with applicants in defining what types of home occupations are prohibited and then specific requirements for child care centers in a home. So this language that we're putting back in is the same as what we previously had in the regulations. We're just getting that added back in. It was omitted just in error. Next section is 5.02 required parking, subsection A. This is the parking table. One use that we have come across a few times over the past year or so is assembly hall. Really sort of like a reception venue or sort of just a hall where people would be holding events. We just didn't have a way to define that in terms of parking and what parking would be required. So, and looking there's some sort of standard parking classifications, and so went out and found that what it would be for assembly hall. And so added that in here. The assembly hall parking rate would be 1 per 3 persons at maximum capacity. So adding that in there so we can get that required parking if we have any of this type of use come through. Next change is in this same section, required parking. Previously, in the last version of the development regulations, we had a sort of a general catch-all parking requirement of 1 space for every 200 square feet of building floor area to which the public has access. And that would be for any use that's not specifically listed out in the parking rate table that we've got in there. It's rare that we get a use that isn't specifically listed out, but on the occasion that you would, you want to have a way to capture that and make sure you're getting adequate parking. So adding that back in. Next change is in the same section, 5.02, required parking. And this is just adding the provision for historic properties to have reduced parking. We wanted to allow users, if they're taking a historic property that's on the National or State Register, have the ability to reduce the parking that may be required based on the parking table without needing to seek a variance. A lot of these uses, you know, they're an established site, and we may not want to have to disturb the site or not allow a use just based on parking requirements. So the way I worded it would be that an applicant could request a reduction, and our staff development review committee would review that and see if it was appropriate, and just provide that, you know, the applicant would need to give us information about their anticipated use, what types of parking they would be needing, turnover rates, that type of thing, so that staff could evaluate that to see if it would be a reasonable request.
So when we review that, then that person will get that approval. And we're not locking that that's a commitment for life. It's just that person is requesting that, then we can grant that as needed on a one-time exception.
With that use. So one
With the
example
use.
would be the Carnegie building
Right.
that was converted to lofts.
Right.
They actually did meet the parking requirements, but say they had not had enough space on that property to meet the requirements for the lofts that they were putting in. We could have reviewed that then and said, okay, well, you're showing us that you've got so much on-street parking within a certain vicinity. You're only having a certain number of residential lofts with this anticipated parking. So this situation is okay. You can do the lofts here without needing to add parking. So even if the applicant who developed the lofts, you know, then sold the building, as long as it stayed as lofts and did not change the use, that parking allowance would stay with that use.
I
Wouldn't
can
be the intent.
think of one instance where this is causing a problem. The new loft development downtown on 2nd Street has a large assembly hall. And when the Council on Aging had their dinner there this last year, then it was filled to overcapacity. They were turning
Yeah.
people away at the door, and parking was within 4 or 5 blocks of the place. It was full.
Sure.
And that caused a problem. So I don't know, and I don't know what we could be done any differently, but it is a problem that we need to consider when we're looking at things like this again.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the capacity is in that rental space down there, and I'm not sure how that was considered when that came through. That came through as part of the, you know, the overall redevelopment of the lofts, and I'm not sure how that was considered. I'm guessing that you know, they would have looked at, you know, the public parking lots, and I'm not sure how they figured that, but yeah, it is something that we want to make sure that we're really evaluating and taking a look at before just allowing that to go through with, you know,
Yeah.
maybe reduced parking.
For the not the historic properties, everything else, on the required parking, is on-street parking or basically assumed that will satisfy some of the requirements, or are this table in addition to any on-street parking?
We've got it in here, if you look on page 5-3, under the historic property provision, it's been renumbered to number 4, so it addresses on-street parking. And so the way we've provided for it currently, and we're not proposing to change it, is that any site on a block containing on-street parking may reduce the required parking by up to 50% for each space within 500 feet. So they're allowed to count some of that, has to be within a certain distance, and they can't reduce down to 0 on-site parking, but they can reduce a portion of it if they want to account for some of that on-street parking that's provided.
Thank you.
Okay. Next section is section 5.03, and this is allowing for a gravel parking pad in the rear of the yard on a residential property. This is something that had actually been previously approved by ordinance, I think about 4 years ago, and just it was overlooked in getting that put into the actual text of the regulations. So it is adopted by ordinance, and we've been following that allowance that residential properties can have a gravel parking pad in the rear if it's accessed off of an alley. We just needed to get that language in here so that everything's on one place and we're not missing that when we're looking at something.
Just because it jogs my memory, the apartments they're putting in the historic building there across from the farmer's market on the west side of the street there. I noticed they put curbs and sidewalks in. Are they going to go ahead and pave that parking then?
Yes, their intention is to pave that parking. That's going to
That's
be sort of the last phase before they get those lofts open. But yes, they will be
That's
paving
good.
the required parking area.
Well, Julie, just one backup thing, I'm sorry.
Sure.
On page 5-3,
Uh-huh.
it just jumped out at me that item E, we're talking about reduction parking for religious institutions. 80% instead of per penny. It's got per cent as two separate words.
Oh,
Just a little
yep.
detail there. Just, thanks.
We will get that updated. Okay. Next section is section 6.08 in regards to fences, specifically commercial and industrial fences. We already had a section for commercial fences, sort of expanded that to provide for commercial and industrial fences. And added a height restriction for commercial fences. We didn't previously have that. So the language I added was fences for commercial uses may be up to 8 feet above the natural contour of the ground. Fences may be installed on the property line except that no fence adjacent to the right-of-way may exceed 6 feet in height, and no fence may be installed in the vision clearance triangle. That's for the area around an intersection or driveway so that we're not blocking any views. So just keeping the fence down to 6 feet if it's adjacent to the right-of-way, so we don't have any 8-foot fences along the road, but allowing for a taller fence around the rest of a property for something that's commercial in use. Okay, the next section is 9.05. This is our historic preservation chapter. So in the administration section, subsections A and C, we had a couple of incorrect section references in there that just didn't get updated with that last revision. So just updated those references to what they should be in this current version of the regulations. And then in the same chapter, section 9.16, the procedure for demolition, alteration, or expansion. For some reason, I'm not sure if this was just sort of a wording error or how it got put in, but it was allowing that any applications except for proposed demolitions would be reviewed by the Preservation Commission. It's certainly not our intention that demolitions not be reviewed by the Preservation Commission. We do want demolitions of historic properties to be reviewed by the Preservation Commission, so just get that language updated so that those proposals would have to go to the Preservation Commission.
Well, the first sentence in that paragraph seems to cover that anyway. It says, upon receipt for an application for demolition, alteration, or expansion of a landmark, a property within the historic district, And the
Yes.
commissioning department shall initiate this
Yeah,
process.
so that sentence that we're taking out contradicted that. So I'm not sure how that ended up in there, probably just an editing error at some point. So just getting that cleaned up. And then in the same chapter, sort of the same process, the public hearing process. And again, the way it read was, except where otherwise specifically accepted, the following processes shall be used whenever historic landmarks or districts are proposed. And so taking out that language that accepted demolitions, or in this case, it actually said alter, expand, or demolish part. So just making sure that, again, everything is going through the public hearing process with the Preservation Commission. So we're capturing all of the potential applications that we'd be dealing with. Next section is Article 12, which is the definitions. So we added a definition for assembly hall, since we did add that to the required parking table. And that definition that I'd pulled from another municipality that I felt like would fit for us. It's any building or portion of a building used primarily for public or private gatherings with a maximum capacity for congregation in the assembly area of at least 50 people. So that's the definition we'd be looking at in terms of an assembly hall. And then also added the definition for commercial vehicle, which again, I pulled from the Kansas Department of Revenue site. This is what they use for licensing their commercial vehicles. And so this would be a motor vehicle or combination of motor vehicles used in commerce to transport passengers or property if the vehicle has a gross vehicle weight rating or gross combination rating, or a gross vehicle weight or gross combination weight over 10,000 pounds, or if the vehicle is designed or used to transport more than 8 passengers, including the driver, for compensation, or the vehicle is designed to transport more than 15 passengers, including the driver, and is not used to transport passengers for compensation, or the vehicle is of any size and used in the transportation of hazardous materials. So that's straight from the Kansas Department of Revenue site. We'll see how that works. Commercial vehicles can be a little bit tricky when we're looking at code enforcement activities, but we didn't have a definition before, so this seemed like a good place to start with one. So we'll work with this over the next year with code enforcement and see how that goes, and then if needed, we can tweak that moving forward. And then our final change is in Appendix A, which is our permitted use table. And again, dealing with the assembly halls, adding assembly hall as an allowed use, and this would be an allowed use in any of the commercial districts, which are neighborhood business, office business, central business, and general business district. So that is the end of our list. So action tonight, we'd be looking for a recommendation of approval or modification based on discussion of the commission, and your recommendation will go forward to the city commission for their final approval, and we would get these incorporated. So if you have any questions, I can answer those for you now.
Thank you. Any questions on the staff report? Very well done.
Very good, very comprehensive.
Just to follow the requirements, I will go ahead now and open the public hearing. Is there anybody that wishes to speak for or against the proposed changes to text amendments? Record should show that nobody wishes to speak. I'll close the public hearing. Open it up now for any discussion among the commissioners. None. And our options are at this point to
If there were no changes proposed by the commission, it would be a recommendation of approval to the city commission.
okay, do we have a motion?
I so move that all the suggested regulations within the staff report are submitted to the city commission for approval.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion to recommend approval, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? Unanimous. Does the staff have any additional business for the Planning Commission?
No other business, just let you know that we do have an application for our December planning commission meeting, so we will be meeting in December.
We will have a planning commission meeting?
Yes.
Have you received a final plat on any of the sections on the residential development at 20th and Eisenhower?
There was the one that the planning commission approved, I believe, in June or July over the summer.
Okay.
Was that the New Lawrence, was that New Lawrence?
Yes,
Yeah.
along New Lawrence. So I'm not sure where they're at in their permitting process in terms of site work and all, but we haven't seen anything else.
I'm just curious, the joint boundary between the residential subdivisions and the industrial development that's happening now, who is going to be responsible for providing buffering and things like that between them? I'm sure there's going to be some instances where...
It's gonna be a little bit of both. On the plat for the industrial park, there is a landscape tract on the west side of the industrial park, so abutting the residential. And then on the
Okay.
residential plat, there's a landscape tract on the east side, so abutting that industrial. So there will be landscaping provided on both sides.
Is that done in the site plan submittal process, or is that done in the final plat? The requirements for...
That would be part of the plat.
Any other issues or comments by the Planning Commission? Okay, well, thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Do you know if there's anything going into the